wouldn't know about his mercy if it hadn't gotten out of grace. Restoration has finally come. I have been restored back to my place in God. Restoration has finally come. I have been restored back to my place in God. You know, when you run out of juice, the Lord will restore you. He'll get you right back where you need to be. Restore me. Restore me. Oh, restore to me the joy. This is my prayer today. Today. Oh, restore to me the joy. This restoration.
Look at this. I guess this is the entire history of Tulsa right here. Greenwood, murder, arson, looting. One thing I find interesting, right above that, reconciliation and shaking hands, and everything's okay now. That's not the case. In America, you can sometimes convince yourself that the nation's legacy of trauma and racial violence is some far-off memory, a grainy black and white past long forgotten. But in Tulsa, Oklahoma, that distance between the past and present begins to shrink. 100 years ago, this community experienced a race massacre.
18 hours of sheer destruction. 18 hours of men fleeing for their lives.
But for Black Tulsans, the story didn't end with the massacre. It continued for 100 years, a trauma felt by each generation in its own way, through segregation, through urban renewal, through gentrification. This story is about the people of Greenwood, what was taken from them, and their fight to be made whole.
I imagine where we would be had it not happened, had not our families been destroyed.
Because the American story can't be contained in a snapshot. It's an epic poem, oral history passed from one generation to the next.
You didn't read it in a book. You didn't see it in a movie. You witnessed it yourself in reality. History can make your heart bleed.
It wasn't always a story about loss and bloodshed. Before that streak of white violence undid this place, the Booker T. Washington coined the Greenwood neighborhood Black Wall Street, a nod to its thriving Black business community, and the name stuck.
Black Wall Street is really a reference to the economic and entrepreneurial character of the business district in the Greenwood community. These were mom and pop type operations, sole proprietorships, beauty salons, restaurants, grocery stores, haberdasheries, pharmacies.
On the eve of the massacre, Greenwood was a district of 10,000 people and one of the wealthiest Black communities in the United States. But Greenwood was an island of Black prosperity in a sea of racism. Situated in the heart of a strictly segregated city, in a segregated state, in a segregated country, and 100 years ago, for 18 hours over the course of one weekend, Greenwood became a tinderbox, lit up by the rage of a white ruling class.
Telephone poles were burned and falling, and my poor sister, who was 2 years younger than I am, Ken, is the world on fire? So I don't think so, but we in deep trouble.
So the catalytic event for the massacre in Tulsa in 1921 began on Monday, May 30th, 1921.
Dick Rowland, 19 years old and Black, crossed paths in an elevator with a 17-year-old white girl named Sarah Page. History books offer us one version of events.
Something happened on the elevator. We don't know exactly what, but it's likely that Dick Rowland either bumped into, brushed up against, or stepped on the foot of Sarah Page. She overreacted. She began to scream. Dick Rowland, frightened, ran from the elevator.
Family lore offers another.
What the man saw was not a man attacking a woman, not a black man attacking a woman. What he saw was two people kissing. Sarah Page and Dick Rowland were lovers. He was accused of attacking her, and Sarah, from what we understand, tried to tell him, no, we're in love. We're getting married.
She would refuse to cooperate with prosecutors after they arrested Dick Rowland and charged him with assault. Though that might have been the end of the story, it wasn't because of the role of the Tulsa Tribune. It published a story the next day entitled "Nab Negro for Attacking Girl in an Elevator."
What happened next should have been shocking, but it's not.
A group of white men amassed on the lawn of the courthouse, numbering ultimately in the thousands. A number of black men, several dozen, some of them World War I veterans, marched down to the courthouse, vowing to protect Dick Rowland from what they thought might be a certain death by lynching.
They had an old pistol around the house. They had people put one in his pocket. He heard that they were trying to lynch a black boy down there at the courthouse.
A white man tried to take a black man's gun, and in the words of a number of survivors of the massacre, all hell broke loose after that.
In less than 24 hours, that mob turned 35 square blocks of unparalleled black economic prosperity into smoldering ashes.
We saw coming up the wall 4 men with torches in their hand. When my mother saw them coming, she says, "You get up under the bed, get up under the bed." They set our house on fire. They went right straight to the curtains and set the curtains on fire.
We saw over 10,000 people be made homeless. In 18 hours, we saw 1,256 homes destroyed.
Today, that land would have been valued at $25 to $30 million. The official death toll was 37, a number almost too low to believe.
Most experts believe that between 100 and 300 people were killed, most of them black. A number of folks in the Greenwood community were interned during the massacre. What that did was to leave the Greenwood community defenseless.
Thousands tried to flee Greenwood.
White guy asked my grandfather, "Where in the hell you going?" Using the N-word. And my grandfather said, we're going out of town. And he said, "Not this day, you're not going out of town." Bam!
You saw your grandfather get shot?
I saw him get shot. Bam!
The first aerial terrorist attack in American history was not done by Al-Qaeda, was not done by the Japanese, but the first time we were attacked by air in this country was done by white men, and they flew planes that were owned by privately held corporations.
When I was awakened by my mother, I was real frightened because she told me what was happening, and she says, "We have to go out, get out." I said, she says, the white people are killing the colored people.
Farther north on the train tracks out of town, the nightmare was just beginning. Eldoris Makandashi, just 9 years old at the time, was running for her life.
And the track was just full of people, and all I could see was black rolling smoke down south and the people going north. It was just the sound of this bricks, stones, buildings blown up. Just the war-torn place.
Eldoris's granddaughter, Joy Makandashi, can only imagine the horrors of her grandmother's escape.
So the bullets are bouncing off of the train tracks and stinging their feet. She's already scared to death, but now they realize, oh, they're shooting at us. They're dropping bombs on us.
Bullets were just raining down over us. The airplanes was up, just raining down the bullets. And I was so frightened, I pulled away from my parents and ran into this chicken coop with all the other people.
100 to 300 dead, thousands more missing. In 2001, the Oklahoma Commission to Study the Race Riot of 1921 released a report naming 3 locations where mass graves from the massacre may be buried. But at the time, the city administration decided that it wasn't worth the expense to dig up the past. In 2020, the city's current mayor, G.T. Bynum, authorized the excavations to commence.
Yeah, I think one of the things that caused previous public officials to avoid it was this fear that there'd be this giant backlash against it, that there'd be this steep political price to pay.
The Republican mayor first proposed looking for victims in 2018, a challenge for the predominantly conservative city of Tulsa, where over 60% of residents are white and just 15% are black.
Someone was not happy with me pursuing this investigation, and she came up to me when I was out at breakfast with my wife and kids and said, "You're just trying to make all the white people who lived in Tulsa in the 1920s look bad." And I said, "My family were white people in Tulsa in the 1920s. I'm not trying to make them look bad, but everybody who lives here deserves to know what happened."
The mayor appointed local historian Kevin Ross to chair a public oversight committee investigating the mass graves. So far, 12 caskets have been exhumed, and the process of identifying them has begun.
How are you actually finding some of these grave sites?
Since we get the power of radar, but most of that is basically just good old-fashioned oral history. Those people who kept the story alive. We knew of 2 tombstones of those who were victims from 1921, but we had never known that they'll be in a trench, stacked like dominoes. I'm hoping that for the 12 or so bodies that's underneath this ground, we'll have some kind of justice. It's been a hole literally in the hearts of Tulsans because there are loved ones that are out there unknown to us. We're just at the beginning on truth.
Vernon AME Church is one of the oldest buildings on Greenwood Avenue. Its facade was one of the few structures to survive the massacre.
There are moments in life when we examine the excruciating evidence of man's inhumanity to man. Some seem to wonder, is God just? We heard the same sentiment in communities of color after Trayvon Martin, after Tamir Rice, after Eric Garner, after Breonna Taylor, and then Ahmaud Arbery and Botham Jean in Texas. We heard it even in my parents' generation after the killing of Emmett Till. And included in that number is the place we stand today. The 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre.
Parishioners huddled in the basement as the city burned around them.
These are the original bricks. This is the wall that shows why the fire didn't spread. Because there's a wall that stretched from here all the way over there.
So this wall right here is what saved this church.
That's right. What saved people who came in from this window.
They would have been fleeing the bombs,
that's right,
the bullets, and would have taken refuge in this space.
In this very space. Man, it is something I can never get used to. Because I know that their cries, that their prayers that they prayed still reverberate. Can you imagine losing an entire community and nobody go to jail? But yet, people still came back to this church. Some with the same question in 1921 that we have in 2021. Is God just?
How do you, as a leader of this church, try to respond to those prayers?
It is knowing that I'm fighting for what they prayed for. We rebuild from ashes. And that's what this church is. If it were not for what God blessed them to do, Vernon would not be here today. And at the Centennial, we wouldn't have anything on historic Greenwood Avenue. But because of what they did, we have something.
Three days after the end of the massacre, the Tribune published an editorial entitled, "It Must Not Be Again." It began, "Such a district as the old nigger town must never be allowed in Tulsa again." No white person was ever held accountable in terms of going to prison, serving jail time, etc., for the devastation of the Greenwood community and the murder of the African Americans who populated the Greenwood community. The ultimate irony is that several dozen black men were indicted for inciting the riot.
Despite being blamed for the massacre, and even though they received no financial assistance, the black people of Greenwood began rebuilding.
I don't know how we built back so quick. Quick might have been 8, 9 years, but then we built all back really better than it is today, I think. And segregation stayed on, segregation was on in those days,
By the early 1940s, there were well over 200 black-owned and operated businesses in the Greenwood community. So there was a renaissance of Black Wall Street. It came back actually bigger and better than ever post-massacre.
Black Wall Street was a community twice born out of necessity. In an era when intense segregation prohibited black people from white-owned establishments, they had to create their own economic oasis.
How y'all doing?
Good, how you doing?
I don't know yet. It's still early day for me. Yeah.
Bobby Eaton Sr. is an 85-year-old lifelong North Tulsan. He grew up hearing stories about the massacre in his father's barbershop.
My dad's friends and customers would come in and they would talk about the riot as long as all of them knew each other. If you came in as a stranger, everything shut down. There's a reason that kind of secrecy existed.
By the time he was a young man, Bobby Sr. turned his father's barbershop into the meeting place for a local chapter of the Congress of Racial Equality. The seeds of a movement were born.
That is what started the civil rights movement in Tulsa. My dad allowed us to take his barbershop, and he had some reservations, knowing what white folks had done, that was going to happen to us. We knew somebody needed to do something. We discussed all them shortfalls. One of the things that just got through happening, George Floyd, things like that happened in our community. Am I militant? Am I hot-headed? Yes, I am. I don't choose to be uncomfortable. Reality has made me uncomfortable.
I grew up in a black world. It was wonderful because we went to all black schools and all black churches, and everything was black, so that's all I knew. Integration shattered. As a kid, it just pretty much shattered my world.
You all have never witnessed integration. You witnessed desegregation.
Right.
Where they allow you to come into now what they used to keep you out of.
So Greenwood, even when you were coming up, long after the massacre, had black businesses. When did it start to change?
When Negro removal came in, and right before that, when they built an expressway right through the heart of Greenwood Business District.
If you were to visit the Greenwood District today, the first thing you notice is a massive overpass that cuts right through the heart of the neighborhood. It's a scar left over from Tulsa's push for so-called urban renewal in the 1960s. Policies that were promoted as tools for revitalizing urban districts instead resulted in black people being pushed out of their communities.
This freeway didn't come into the powers of urban renewal back in the 70s, and basically severing this whole community. And so, like I always say to many people, this freeway is sitting upon my inheritance. Who's to say that my great-grandfather would have not left this for me? A business on Greenwood, which I desire to this day.
By the early 1970s, urban renewal gobbled up and demolished more than 1,000 businesses and homes, many of them in Greenwood. And the highway forced Black Tulsans to move north, west, and east, rather than the typically more prosperous neighborhoods south of the railroad tracks.
Urban renewal, which is, I call urban removal, came in and knocked down all the housing and all the old buildings and really destroyed our community.
Bobby Eaton Jr. and his son Trey continue to carry on the Eaton legacy. The barbershop is closed, but the family founded Eaton Media and started a community radio station in the same nearly 100-year-old building.
Joe Eaton, right here. This is the man that made it all possible right here. And he and Louise, my grandmother, we missed him dearly. They said he was about 22 years old when the massacre took place. Somewhere he shined shoes down there on Black Wall Street. A lot of memories in this old house. If we weren't able to hold on to that, I wouldn't be here right now. I wouldn't have a radio station, and we would be just like other families who lost all their property.
Man, if the walls could talk, but being that it's here and not many of my peers not able to have family property that's over 100 years, over 100 years old, not too many of us have buildings with our names on it. It's Eaton. It's been barbershops, it's been beauty salons, it's been almost a little bit of everything.
I wonder, when you were coming up, when did you first hear about the massacre?
I didn't hear about the massacre until I got grown.
Wow.
They didn't talk about it. It was not discussed in the school systems, in the community, in the neighborhoods. Tulsa, Black Tulsa has been traumatized. And with that trauma and urban renewal, moving out the history, the young youth grow up never knowing the history. They don't know anything about what once existed over here in North Tulsa. All they see is empty lots and things like that. So I don't think it's been a good thing for us at all.
All through our childhood, we heard the chicken coop story. Your grandmother hid in the chicken coop. Mama hid in the chicken coop. But never the connection.
You didn't know why, it was just the
Never
chicken
the
coop
connection,
story.
just the chicken coop story. Until 1999, I live in Los Angeles, I'm working for the government and I'm at work. There she is on the front page of the Los Angeles Times, a city's buried shame.
Up until that moment, Joy had never known about the trauma her grandmother had lived through. She picked up her baby and took the first flight back home to Tulsa, eager for answers.
Grandma, why you didn't tell us? You should have told us, Grandma. And she looked at us, she looked at me, and she said, because I wanted to have you. And the baby is bumbling, and she said, and I wanted to have him. Had they spoke of this by any means, pretty much, they would have been labeled as troublemakers, and their lives would have been in danger. And they would have been killed with no repercussions from it. And therefore, they would never have been able to have children, grandchildren. And that's what she meant.
So the root word of reparations is repair. This situation has not been repaired. Repair me. Repair me as a person, repair me as a citizen, whatever that takes, whatever it looks like, so that we can have true restoration.
Eloise Cochran Price is the cousin of Dick Rowland. She and other descendants and living survivors of the massacre are suing the city of Tulsa for what happened to their families.
Let's bring justice to a people who have been harmed, who continue to be traumatized, generation after generation. We're talking about going on 4 generations of tragedy.
Money is never real justice because the person's not coming back. But it's the closest that we can get. All we ask for in this country as black people is give us what everyone else gets. We want equality and equity. And so all we say is replace it. Either give us the property back or give us the fair market value. That's all we're asking for.
Tulsa native Demario Solomon Simmons first heard about the massacre when he was in college at the University of Oklahoma. Today, he leads the legal fight against the city on behalf of the victims of 1921. What do you say to those folks who say, it's 100 years later, I didn't commit any atrocities, you're not a victim? What do you say to them?
Yeah, I would say, hey, maybe you wasn't there, but the city was an entity. The city was alive. Legally, the city is the same city that it was in 1921 as it is in 2021. It's more than a massacre. It's the massacre and 100 years of continuing harm. When you just think about right after the massacre, the first thing the city of Tulsa did was create a new law that we couldn't properly rebuild because they wanted to take our land. You think about them building the largest KKK meeting hall in Tulsa, right next to Greenwood, 1923. You think about them intentionally, purposely bringing this highway right through the community. Finally destroyed Greenwood and pushed us further north. And when they pushed us further north, they pushed us in ghetto-like conditions. These were intentional acts. They intentionally never wanted to allow Greenwood to build up and have the power that it had pre-1921. So yes, this is more than just a massacre. We're talking about the harm right to this day.
In 1921, the city of Tulsa refused to pay reparations. The city of Tulsa said they're not culpable for the massacre. So we come here because we know as a black people in this nation that even our victories are short-lived. So we have to continue to march on. Let us march home and march on to victory is won.
The Reverend Turner and the Vernon AME Church have joined Demario Solomon Simmons' reparations lawsuit. Every Wednesday since September 12th of 2018, the pastor has led a protest in front of City Hall, demanding reparations from the city.
Let's finish the real civil rights movement. Let's do reparations, not tomorrow, not next week, not next year, but let's do reparations now. If we can put a man on the moon, we can do reparations here in Tulsa.
I support direct payments to the folks who are the survivors. I support, in absence of the survivors, direct payments to their descendants. Criminal charges being filed against those individuals and institutions that oversaw and actually were a part of the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre.
I will work for justice as long as there is blood in my veins and air in my lungs.
I go up here and I pray afterwards, thanking God for bringing me through. Chris, can you make sure they come in, the folks who are outside? Yeah. This way. Whew. Thank you, Lord. Boy, I'm tired. As crazy as this may sound, I know I don't feel it totally because I wasn't here, but I feel a remnant of their pain and wanting them to receive justice in death, even though they may not have received it in life. And what keeps me going is because I really still do believe in this country. I really believe that America can be even greater than what she is. God drives me in my call for remembering those who suffer and the institutions who suffer, like this church. And God calls me to love even this nation that I live in, even though she doesn't always love me.
What I want you to pay attention to is where it says reopened, because a lot of the markers will say not reopened.
Plaques line the sidewalks of Greenwood, serving as a reminder of the businesses that burned on these streets, most of which were never rebuilt.
See, like that one? It says not reopened. Construction company, not reopened.
At the height of Black Wall Street, there were over 300 Black-owned businesses on 12 miles of Greenwood Avenue. Today, there are just 23. Torrey Tyson Salon was one of them. it had been in her family for 3 generations.
I started out on Greenwood as a shampoo assistant in the 90s. So I've totally been down there for over 20 years, you know, then owning it for 14 years.
One day, she noticed that other Black business owners in the area were moving out.
Our reason of going live is to tell y'all about what's going on Greenwood. This was a mini mart. Greenwood's supposed to be affordable for small Black business. I'm gonna try to do this video without crying, y'all.
I just noticed a lot of leadership changing. I noticed that the building was deteriorating, but everything around us was building up. And I just couldn't be quiet about it. And I was like, what's going on? They was like, well, they doubled my rent, I can't pay it.
Gave us, go ahead and vacate her judgment and dismiss the case.
So this really is the last remaining footprint of what Greenwood was.
It is. It is the last remaining footprint.
In 2017, the Greenwood Chamber of Commerce raised Tory's rent. They threatened to raise it 3 more times over the next 3 years, from $750 to $1,550 a month. In December of 2020, she received an eviction notice, and the next month, she went to court.
It's kind of emotional, but I'm trying to keep a straight face today. Part of me knew that I was gonna end up having to leave at the end of the day, but part of me knew like, oh, I'm gonna win this case, because I literally have stacks of information. Like, I just knew I was right, and I still feel like I was right. Today is the day I go to court today.
In March, Tory lost her case and was forced from the space she'd called home for 14 years.
It was really hard. So, you know, I've been here so long, and I knew the history. I knew I wasn't wrong. I knew what Greenwood was capable of. And so that was my goal. That was what I wanted. And so I knew I just cried on my clients, my family. I don't regret anything. I never will regret anything.
When you hear the stories of the elders, and maybe even the ones maybe in your family, how do you think your family was affected?
My grandmother was 10, so I could just imagine the age my kids are that age. I think it probably trickled down, you know, to my family. And I could see where the change in the generations could happen. Because, you know, a lot of people lost their dads, their family, so they never talked about it. A lot of them disappeared. They never recovered. Houses destroyed, businesses destroyed. You know, yeah, we resilient, we rebuild. You know, it seem like it was easy for me to move my business within a month, and I feel like I was destroyed. You know, so I can just imagine how they felt.
In April, Tory began the process of opening a new salon, this time in far north Tulsa.
It's a busy area. I'm surprised that it's a lot of traffic. I love the traffic, so that's another thing I'm excited about moving forward. Another dryer. Looks pretty easy. The more I get my equipment in and get my new salon together, it feels better. It feels like home now. Let me move this stuff over first. We're all excited about my new location. My customers are really, really excited. Your head miss me? I miss you too. Hey.
Have you been back to Greenwood?
Once, but I haven't like walked around on the sacred grounds or anything. I just kind of passed by on different little areas. I haven't even, yeah. I didn't take it lightly, and I still don't. I'm still pretty much hurt about it. Because it's sacred grounds, it's history. It's our history. I ain't lying, that was my spot, honey. I cried like a big old baby. But I feel better now. But I still miss it.
Why can't Black Tulsa get a break? Why do they keep targeting Black Tulsa? Every time it seems Black Tulsa takes a step forward, they beat it back. Why?
Racism, pure, unadulterated racism.
That never changed.
What you refer to as Black Tulsa is not so black today.
Most of Greenwood, at the time of the massacre, was about 40 square blocks. Now we're down to half a block that's black ownership. I don't even like to use the word gentrification. It's just white, it's just land grab. It's theft. It's land that was owned by black people, they were dispossessed illegally through the massacre or through other government programs like urban renewal. We call it Negro removal down here.
On the corner of Archer and Greenwood Avenues, the one-time border of Black Wall Street, Tulsa is building a museum that will tell the story of Greenwood. Some are skeptical.
That's museum.
Yeah, I seen
big
that.
one.
Yeah, it look like it's gonna be real nice.
Greenwood Rising. I think museum is a great thing. If the content inside of the walls is relevant, if it depicts American history instead of just black history, because all of the things that black people have endured is done right here in America. It should be in American history taught in all the schools all of the time.
Do you think like the white business community sees an opportunity, right? Maybe take advantage of this moment with the centennial?
I do in a lot of ways, because some of them, hearts are not in the right place. They see how they can gain economic wealth off of this right here as well. And I don't want to see the centennial be whitewashed.
The descendants of Greenwood have long since moved beyond the conspiracy of silence. Today, they aim to pass on their history, Tulsa's history, to the next generation.
What y'all getting ready to talk about? Black Wall Street?
No.
Huh?
The weather, our weeds.
We got what I call a juice radio show. And man, those young people get together and get in there and they talk that talk, and I even learned something from them, what's going on in 2021.
Yes, Lord.
Someone was like, oh, someone got shot by a cop. And I went to go watch the video. That's like what really triggered me, because like the cops yelling taser.
Wait, which one is it?
Dante Wright.
Dante Wright.
As a police officer, you would think that you would know what's on your stuff. You know your stuff, what's on your waist. Yeah. But so she grabbed her gun out with her right hand and she shot him.
Yeah, just stuff for words.
Because it's just like, everybody make mistakes. But that's a fatal mistake.
Yeah.
That's mistakes you can't just have going on.
The more information we can give to our youth and to our kids, then they can transfer that on to their generations. That's one thing I think that the older elders need to start doing, is transferring that information.
Before it's too late.
Yeah, before it's too late. Get up and get with a young person and share that information. Talk to them. Give them the history so they'll know.
To the young people of today, knowing that Tulsa has not always been what it is today, you've got so much to be thankful for, that you're halfway there. You've got a long way yet to go for it to be free.
The call to pass on the history of Black Wall Street has been taken up by many in the Greenwood community.
Greenwood was not a street. Greenwood was a whole entire 3.5 square mile district. You have to ask yourself, where did all this money come from? How did these people become so wealthy in Greenwood? And why don't we have it today?
I have an obligation to give to young folk their history. I don't want to take it to the grave. You're on Greenwood, right? What do you know about the history of Greenwood? I'm talking to both of you now.
They had the Tulsa race riot.
Yeah.
And they burned everything down, burned down the black-owned businesses. And
you know more about it than most young folk your age. I want them to understand these systems that they're dealing with, but they have to listen. And they have to understand one thing. You are an African American. It has been that way for 400 years. And it will be that way for another 400 years, regardless of the progress you make.
100 years later, that's why we out here.
Yeah, yes, ma'am.
This is one of the few things left to tell the story right.
If you're gonna tell it right.
Don't tell it white, tell it right.
This year, Joy McConaughey is hosting a Century Walk, an invitation to the community to walk in her grandmother's shoes, to feel the pain their ancestors went through, and to show resilience. Her son, Emmanuel Ortega, and his daughter, Maria, will join her on the tracks.
It's gonna be a long walk, but just think, that's how far they were forced to run. It's just to think that a 9-year-old girl did that.
As for whether he'll share the story with his own daughter,
I think I will. I think her being here now, she's 5 years old. This is little Maria, and she's not little, but she's 5 years old, and I was just, like I said, my great-grandmother was only 9, and I want to teach her that our family is strong, and our family not only continues the history, but they make their own.
We're in a relay. It's like a relay race. The torch has to be passed. My great-grandparents who built Black Wall Street, that leg of the race is gone. But that's why it's important for me to teach my son and train him up and tell him this story. So when it's time for me to lay it down like the rest of them, and I can't run no more, I can pass the baton to him, and he can win the race for us. Walking into the future.
Walking into the future.
Walking
Say it loud, say it
into the
loud.
future.
Hey.
Walking into the future.
I like that.
I like it too, man.
12 days before the centennial commemoration, the 3 remaining survivors of the Tulsa Race Massacre, accompanied by Demario Solomon Simmons, testified before Congress in favor of reparations.
Our country may forget this history, but I cannot. I am a 107-year-old and have never seen justice. I pray that one day I will.
We aren't just black and white pictures on a screen. I was there when it happened. I'm still here.
I am asking you today to give us some peace. Please give me, my family, and my community some justice. Thank you.
As Black people in this country, there's a deep sense of togetherness, and in some way or another, each of us have inherited a little piece of the trauma passed down from those who came before us. But we've also inherited strength and resilience. I saw that blend of tragedy and triumph in the people of North Tulsa. Because this isn't Black history, this is American history. And in fact, it's not even history at all. It's just another chapter in a story that's still being written.
Thank you for tuning in to Restoration Ministries Church of God in Christ broadcast. We hope that you've heard something today that will be helpful to you. If you would like to sow a seed, we have several ways to do that. Cash App at Restoration COGIC, through Givelify you would search Restoration Ministries, Zelle at restorationcogicfinance@gmail.com, or by mailing in your seed at Restoration Ministries, Church of God in Christ, P.O. Box 18371, Charlotte, North Carolina 28218. Our service opportunities are Sunday morning worship service at 10:45 a.m., Wednesday night Bible study at 7 p.m., and Thursday night prayer moment at 7 p.m. It is our endeavor that when you leave here, there will be nothing missing, nothing lacking, and nothing broken.
What would I know about being restored if I never lost my place? What would I know about His mercy if I hadn't gotten out of grace? Restoration has finally come. I have been restored back to my place in God. Restoration has finally come.